welcome to the Cross-Cultural Mission Forum. You're very, very welcome. And today we are going to focus for a time on how we prepare ourselves for cross-cultural mission. We've got Jim Memory with us this morning, who is, let me just give you a little introduction to Jim. He's one of, he's a great friend of Relational Mission. He was with us in Malaga for the Pioneer Conference, so many of you will know of him there. And Jim is involved in leading various teams who work on European mission. He's on the leadership team of the European Christian Mission Organization on Lausanne, Europe, and he's also involved in training both thinkers and practitioners who are on mission in the mainland of Europe. And added to all that, and all the lecturing and things he does, he's had 15 years of experience planting churches, mostly in Spain. So Jim is our precious gift, who we are very happy to have amongst us today. And so Jim, I just want to introduce you in that way. I don't know how people want to try and do it, because sometimes it's hard to get the right person on the screen. You can hopefully pin Jim if you try pinning the person. If you find Jim, can you see Jim? Jim, do you want to speak for a minute?
Something bright this morning, so I've got
my
shirt on.
There you go. There's Jim. So he hopefully you'll better see him on the screen as he starts to speak. But you might also be able to pin him on there so that he stays in the middle of your screen. But Jim, I'm going to give you the floor and take us on a whirlwind tour of how to prepare ourselves for cross-cultural mission.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody for today. It's a huge honour to be back with you again. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with many of you down in Malaga, not just because we were down in Malaga, but it was a real meeting of minds. And frankly, since I connected with Mike Betts and Morris and Mark, everything we've done together has just been fabulously enjoyable, and just want to honour them and thank them for the invitation today. A little bit about our story. I'm going to show you a few photographs in a minute. I'm going to share my screen and we'll go through the presentation, but I thought it was best to begin with you seeing my face and hearing a little bit. I'm from the UK, as you can tell. I became a Christian as a result of church planters. Back in the 70s, some American missionaries came to my little village just outside of Northampton, and they were starting a church there, and that's how I became a believer. So for me, church plant is normal church. I find more traditional and set churches more difficult to deal with sometimes. My career, I worked for a number of years for Kodak, and my wife is a catering manager, and we left those jobs to train for mission. We spent 2 years doing biblical and cross-cultural studies at All Nations College in the UK, and then we joined ECM, European Christian Mission, to go out to Spain to plant a church in the south of the province of Cordoba. We brought up our kids there. We saw people become Christians. We led the church for a number of years, and then handed it over to local leaders in 2008. Came back to the UK, got involved in mission training, initially at Redcliff College, and then with mission leadership within ECM. And I now, as Marcus said, I now work with ECM, with Lausanne Movement, and with All Nations Christian College. Now, this morning, I've not got a lot of time to basically do a full-blown course on how to prepare for getting involved in cross-cultural missions. So I'm going to go very quick. A lot of the things I'm going to say are going to leave lots of questions. Please do put your questions on the chat. We're going to have 2 question blocks, and the first one's going to come up reasonably quickly after I've done some initial stuff to do with preparation. So I'm going to share my screen now. Just let me know that this is all coming through. Okay, and can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, So that's what we looked like in 1991 when I had hair. And that's the little church that we helped to get started in the town of Montilla in Cordoba. We brought up our kids in Spain, tried to make as much as we could adjustments to Spanish culture, just to say that's not how Spanish children normally go about. That's just what they do at Christmas. So those are the Spanish version of shepherds. And we got involved with so many different evangelistic things through the years. That was a campaign that we did based around the series Lost. And anyway, so what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to do a bit about how to prepare to step out of your own culture and be involved in a church plant, and then have a Q&A for a few minutes, and then how to survive and thrive in another culture. But the first thing I want to say is actually around the importance of your calling and your motives. The truth is that if you don't have a clear calling, if you are not absolutely sure that you are where God wants you to be, after a while, you won't cut it. You need to know that God has sent you to do this. You need to be absolutely convinced of that. And then you can hold on in there when things get tough. So that's really a vital first thing to say. I think it's important from many different angles, but I'm reminded of this passage in Luke 14. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, and he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate mother and father, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.'" Now, those words are true for all disciples, of course, but it's particularly true for those of us who are involved in church planting cross-culturally, because a little bit of you dies every single day. I love to make people laugh. I'm quite funny. And for 1.5 years, I couldn't do that. For 1.5 years, I wasn't able to say something that would make someone laugh. And that was a nightmare for me. A little bit of me seemed to die every day. Now, in fact, all of us have experienced a little bit of what it is to cross a cultural boundary in the last year, because we've been living in Covilandia. Living in Covilandia is a bit like living in another country. Everything about life has changed during this year. You can't do certain things that you did before. The way of relating to people has changed. That's a little bit of a sense of what it's like to be involved in cross-cultural mission. So I'd really encourage you to test your calling. If you're married, it needs to be something that both of you are completely united in. Test your calling with your church leaders, with those who know you best. Press them to tell you the truth, to be honest with you. And be honest with yourself too about what your motives are. Is it really that God is calling you to step out? Or is there another motivation? Are you running away from something? Is it actually about ambition, finding an identity that really you should be looking for in Christ? When you imagine yourself in the place that you will go, and you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see a hero, or do you see a servant? One of the most important things that you need to do to prepare to step out in cross-cultural mission is actually to test your motives. Because as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, when Christ calls someone, he bids them come and die. Okay, I'm going to turn to practical things now. How do you get ready for involvement in cross-cultural mission? Now, are you seeing my notes when I do that? Did you see my notes, or just the?
No, seeing your desktop at the moment.
Only my desktop.
Yeah.
but not the presentation.
No, seems to have disappeared.
Okay, let me try that again.
It's a nice wallpaper, though.
Anybody recognize where that is? It's Athens. Okay, do you see that now?
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know why that wasn't. When I try and share it, it goes to the other screen, which is no help. But okay, if you can see that, is that too small? Is that? Let me try and go a bit bigger. How about that? Better?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay. So getting ready. It's very difficult to summarize in 10 minutes everything you need to know, but we spent 2 years, as I said, at All Nations College thinking about this stuff. But I would encourage you, if you want to do this in a deeper way, check out the en route course that that there is at All Nations. It's a 10-week course. They also do an online version. First thing you need to do is to clarify your expectations. And what I'm talking about here is what does your home church expect of you? What does Relational Mission expect of you? What are you expecting that you'll be doing when you get there? What do you expect of yourself? It's good to ask questions, in particularly around the area of accountability and communications. What are people expecting of you? Those are people that you're talking to and those people that you're engaged with. It's great and vital to assess your knowledge. I've talked already about cross-cultural preparation that we did, but also you should be honest with yourself about your theological preparation, not just your Bible knowledge, but also your competence in discipleship and disciple making. If you're going to be involved in cross-cultural church planting, then get some experience of church planting in your own culture first. Knowledge also of the country that you're going to be working in. Now that's a huge issue, and I'll say more about that in the second part of this talk today, but I'd really encourage you to make use of the books that are out there about cultural difference. I just want to wave 2 books at you. The first of these is a book by a Dutch guy called Geert Hofstede, who talks about terms, difference, dimensions of culture. That's really helpful. This other one is even better in some ways because it's it describes. I'm waving these at you and you can't see them, but basically it's Lewis's book, When Cultures Collide. And that sets out the differences between different cultures. There's a chapter on almost every country, setting out different kinds, different aspects of that culture. It's good to evaluate your language learning competence before you go overseas. Language learning is a function of many different things. Your ability, your natural ability, that's got nothing to do with the grades you got at school. Your personality, your motivation. And then of course, there are some languages that are more difficult than others, but I'd really encourage you to have some sort of language aptitude test if you've never learned another language. Dyslexia is a lot more common than people realize, and many people don't discover that they're dyslexic until they start learning the grammar of another language. So best to do that beforehand. Fourthly, strengthen your stakes. You'll recognize that quote from Isaiah 54. Enlarge the place of your tent, stretch your tent curtains wide, do not hold back, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes. Well, that's what church planting is all about. It's about enlarging God's tent. And when you're involved in cross-cultural church planting, those cords can get very long. So you really do need to strengthen your stakes. Your relationships with your sending church is absolutely vital. Build a strong group of prayer supporters from the very beginning. Whatever the initial sense is where you said, okay, God really is confirming this, I think you need to test that in multiple ways and with multiple people. And you know, I think you do need to speak to your church leaders about it early on. I think you do need to talk to other people who know you well and get their sense. And it may be that it's a surprise for them, but how do they respond to you talking about it? Is their heart also warmed by what you're saying? If you are able to make a visit, I would really encourage that. And we certainly went through an experience where our initial sense of call, which was actually to go to the Far East with a mission called OMF, Overseas Missionary Fellowship, we made a visit and we had the opposite to what we expected. God confirmed our call to church planting, but not to the Far East. And we found that it was just not what, rather than firing our hearts, we came back asking lots of questions. Why would we go to where the church is thriving when here in Europe things are so bad? And as our time went on, and this is the other thing I would say, time really is a factor here. If you can't get it out of your head, if God keeps bringing you back with different words, with different things, if you find that you're getting, as we did, indignant that nobody else sees this as critical. We were at All Nations College at that time. We used to have a weekly session where people would talk about things that were happening, what God was doing around the world. Nobody ever talked about Europe. And we would get so annoyed. And we said, why are we getting so annoyed? And it was a sense of God's calling. And then we came out to Spain, never visited Spain before, couldn't speak a word of Spanish. And we just knew in our hearts, this is where God wanted us to be. So over a long period of time, of about a year, it was confirmed in multiple ways. So yes, God can move you quickly, but I think it's good to check with different key people in your life, your leaders, the people that know you best, to test it out with experience, and to look out for God confirming it in different ways through different avenues. I don't know whether that is helpful, Roger, but that's my answer for now.
That's excellent, Jim. Thank you very much.
I think I saw somebody else. Can you say more about culture shock, how it manifests and how to deal with it? Yeah. I gave an example of the culture shock for me around my sense of humor. I think it affects everybody in different ways. But the thing about culture shock is that you are, I think the primary experience of culture shock is disorientation. We don't realize just how much our culture around us orients us and helps us to feel safe and settled. And that's why I mentioned the example of COVID, because COVID has changed the culture, and it means that suddenly we don't feel settled. We're more stressed. We're more likely to, that's a fly off the handle is a very English expression, more likely to get angry, more likely to react in ways that are not normal. And so culture shock manifests itself in your reactions, to feel it in your body. It can be manifested in physical ways as well. And also in a sense of spiritual disorientation also. I think I will say more about this as I go forward in a second. So I'm going to park that question. I'm going to take one more question if there is one, and we'll come back to culture shock in the second half. Okay. In addition to preparation, calling, knowing you are in the right place, do you have insight on team dynamics in a small church planting situation? In our observation, this in a major way, a church plant can come under pressure. Absolutely. I will say something more about that now. So I'm going to move on because I'm going to say more about some of this stuff as we go. So I'm now moving on to talk about surviving and thriving in another culture. What do people do differently? And of course, there are thousands of things that people do differently, just like there are thousands and thousands of leaves on a tree. Those are the first things that you see when you cross a cultural barrier. But they're actually not the most important things. They are not just suspended in the air. The leaves hang on twigs and branches and a trunk, and that itself is supported by roots. And a deeper understanding of culture must take us beyond just understanding the leaves, what people do. So as you go, make a note of these things. Who are the heroes in that culture, in that place? What, whether they are alive or dead, real or even imaginary, are celebrated, are revered, or are feared? Who are the people that people constantly mention that they aspire to be like, that are influential in their worldview, in their way of thinking? Then think about the rituals. What are the rituals that people do, not just because they do it, but because it's seen as being really socially essential in that place? Those are the sort of peculiar ritual, like when for British people, tea, okay, is much more than a drink. Okay, tea is a sort of answer to everything for British people. If you've arrived at somebody's house, they offer you a cup of tea. If someone's not feeling very well, they offer you a cup of tea. If you just want to show that you appreciate somebody, it's absolutely a symbolic thing. It's a ritual that has a meaning. And there are other symbols as well, words, gestures, pictures, objects in any given culture that carry significance. Certain places, certain things speak powerfully of identity, and those symbols, you need to be on the lookout for those. Going to the next level down, you get to the values. And the values are very much like the trunk of the culture tree. What are the broad and shared ways of being and doing that are preferred over others? Language learning is absolutely critical for the communication of the gospel. And obviously we are people, when we're in our own culture, who are able to communicate fluently, and really we don't even think about it. But suddenly to not be able to communicate is incredibly frustrating. And I would really, really encourage you to if you've not gone yet, to get yourself a language learning assessment before you go. Language learning is a function of many different things. It's a function of ability, natural ability. It's good to know what your ability level is. Most people can learn another language. It's just monolingual people that are odd in our world today. Most people speak 2 or more languages. It's also a function of your personality. And the more open you are, the more willing, the less perfectionistic you are, the better. That sounds counter-logical, but perfectionistic people tend not to speak until they can be sure that what they're saying is right. And you need to make mistakes. And so I would always set myself the goal of learning a new word every day. And I tried to do that even after years and years of being in Spain, to have a new word each day, to try and find an arbitrary reason to use that word 3 times every day. And it would make for a very interesting conversation when I would bring in the word for ear, nose and throat doctor, otorrinolaryngologo, just slip that into the language, not only because it's difficult to say, but just to push yourself forward, keep pushing yourself forward. Be aware of other languages as well. It's not just about the spoken written language. There is body language that is different as well. Recognize that and make a note of it. The signs are different. They mean different things. Back to the thing of disorientation. It's important to learn those too. Musical notation. I worship, come to Spain. At least that's something I can do. I can play the guitar. No, you can't. Not until you've learned that they use a different musical notation, different chords, and so on and so on. Measurements are different. Currency is different, and so on. Martin and Sarah's word here, don't be too hard on yourself. You will keep making mistakes and doing silly things. Very true. Try to reflect on the progress you've made, encourage each other. You're probably more unaware of your progress than those around you. Very wise words there. On the language front, just one last thing. When you make a mistake, okay, when you make an absolutely horrendous mistake, take that mistake and turn it into a fabulous story. Laugh at yourself. So when I famously declared in a sermon at Christmas that, of course, myrrh in the ancient world was commonly used as a condom, okay? Because the word for preservative in Spanish, conservante, okay? But the word preservativo means condom, okay? So of course, that got a huge laugh, and because Spanish people are as they are, they immediately texted all their friends, and by the time I got to the pastor's fraternity the next day, they all knew the story, okay? The way to take the power out of that is to tell it yourself, okay? So when you make mistakes, laugh at yourself and tell it to somebody else and let them in on the joke. It's all part of what it means to learn, okay? Adapting and integrating. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to go for until 1:15, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions at the end, okay? Adapting and integrating. These are, it's not so much I've got lots of points to say here as much as these are things you need to observe and to think about. The timetable. You have to leave the timetable that you have adopted in your mind behind. You have to adapt to the timetable that is set by the culture where you're working. Fighting against the timetable is probably the surest way to go mad. So if you're from the UK, you will have a day that is divided into 3, morning, afternoon, evening. You've got your meals that divide the day up. In Spain, the day is divided into 2. There is just morning and afternoon. In the middle of the day, there's a flexible period, which in the winter is probably just an hour, hour and a half. In the summer, stretches out to 4 hours because it's too hot to do anything or even to think. So don't try and do anything outside of the timetable that's set by the culture where you're working. Food. Don't fight against the food. Make the effort to adapt your diet. You don't have to eat the same as the locals do all the time, but make a point of trying to love the local food. You will be served it. Not only will you be served it, you'll be asked if you like. The best thing to do to make people happy is to eat their food. It's one of the things, the best ways we can share love with people is by eating their food. What did Jesus do? He spent loads of time eating with people. You guys know all of that. So if you're in another culture, you've got to make the effort to adapt to the food so that you can enjoy it. Children, we can spend a whole time talking about the challenges of bringing up children in another culture. Just to really prioritize your kids. If you're parents, to make a point of listening to the cultural challenge that your children are having. They're actually they adapt much more easily than we do often. But to listen and to respond, and don't ignore the challenges that they are having with integrating into the culture. If anything, put their needs above your own in that regard. Temperament. Note the different temperaments that may well predominate in your culture. Spain is a very extroverted culture. Therefore, introverts have a hard time, and you're going to have to you have to find spaces to get away from people. Paradoxically, in this last year, it's been, of course, all the extroverts that have had the problem because they've not been able to be with people. So that's been interesting to observe. Communication styles, different ways of communicating, how close people stand when they communicate. You might not even think it, but that social distance thing, that until this year, nobody ever talked about social distance, is actually a big deal. And it communicates a lot how close you stand to someone. The joke goes, of course, that the Swedes at the end of the first period of lockdown, when they were told that standing 2 meters apart was no longer going to be rigidly applied, were relieved to be able to go back to standing 4 meters apart, because that's where they are. Okay, in Spain, it's about half a meter. It is much closer. So communication distance, humor is very different. My sense of humor is very ironic. I had to learn how to use irony in a new way in Spain, and you can't just get the jokes often initially, and that's quite frustrating. Make a huge effort to make friends with local people as much as you can from the very beginning. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. Martin and Sarah. Things will take a lot longer and take a lot more effort than you are used to. From small things like going shopping or bigger practicalities like healthcare. Things you think of as minor in your own culture will suddenly feel like major victories when you accomplish them. Church and team. Somebody asked about team in the questions, and so now I'm going to talk a bit about that. I'd really encourage you, because obviously you're not just there to live, you're there to establish a church, to remember that you're not taking God in your suitcases with you. God is already there, and probably the church is already there in some way, shape or form, even if there's absolutely a need for new churches, and that's why you're church planting there. So make contact with the national churches in your area. Even if it's only a matter of courtesy, it's a good thing to do. Learn to appreciate the local forms of worship that exist in that place already, and the ways that they do Christian community that might be different to your own. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Many things will already be evident in the culture as ways in which the Christians relate to each other. If there are other cross-cultural missionaries, it's good to contact with them as well. And where possible, I would really encourage you to build multicultural teams. In a way, this is connected with the thing where I've put on the screen, be careful about not becoming a bubble. What I mean by that is this: if all of your team members are all from one culture, the temptation to turn that into a little cultural bubble within this new broader culture will be huge. Now, some degree of support from others within your own culture is appropriate and even helpful, but multicultural teams help to negotiate better, I think, the dangers there, and also to help to interpret to each other what is going on in the culture, because otherwise it can very easily become a them and us conversation, which is not helpful. I would really encourage you to invest time in building your team. There are courses, there are things you can do, exercises you can do together to do team relationships, work on your team dynamics. Most missionary attrition, so most people who leave and don't manage to survive in a church planting, cross-cultural church planting, it's not because they can't adapt to the culture. It's not because they disagree on doctrine, not because they fail to adapt, it's because they can't get on with their teammates. Okay, so getting on with your team is absolutely vital. Be careful with social media and with remaining too connected to your home culture. Now, I wouldn't have had to say this when we came to Spain, because when we came to Spain, the only way to communicate with our supporters was a fixed telephone line and written mail. Okay, so post. That's all changed now, of course. We're not in the dark ages anymore. But social media, Facebook, spending too much time on Facebook, spending too much time connected to people back home can cause you to have problems with integrating, and it's really important not to do that. But to take time to communicate with your supporters each week. Again, I say so much about all this stuff. Lastly, I want to say a little bit about rest and recreation. Culture stress the stress of living, working in another culture never completely goes away. Even when you've been in a country for many, many years, there's still a little bit of the stress associated with that remains with you. And that is real, and you shouldn't beat yourself up about it. There are ways to reduce it. Physical exercise, games, fun, all help us to reduce stress. But one of the main and most important things to do is just to rest more. To make sure that you take a proper day off every week. Now, that may need to adapt to the culture. In our case, we actually did an equivalent of a Sabbath. So we would run from 6 p.m. on a Friday evening to 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening. It was very difficult to carve out a whole day, but we did have a 24-hour period. And I was very religious about that. Get away every now and then. Don't just take a day off. If possible, get out of where you're living so that you completely disconnect for a little bit. All of this can really help. So again, last sort of words from Martin and Sarah. In your efforts to integrate, don't be afraid to enjoy your own culture. Make friends with a few people of your own culture. They will help. They'll be able to empathize with your struggles and help you on the way. So before we go into the Q&A, I just want to say at the end there, there's a few books, some of the ones I waived and some of the ones I didn't. There's a link to the course I mentioned earlier on. I'm going to end there, and with that way we've got a full 15 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to take my presentation off, stop sharing the screen. That's better. And then I'll bring up the chat because I think you might have put some questions in there. Is that right? Okay.
Jim, there's one I think there from Bob and Andrea. I don't know if you've answered that one earlier. It says, in addition to preparation and calling, knowing you are in the right place, etc., do you have insight on team dynamics in a small church planting situation? In our observation, this is a major way a church plant can become under pressure. I think you alluded to that.
I did. Yeah, I mean, I would just emphasize again how this can be so easily forgotten, that your expectations are that you're all coming with the same goal, and it may well be the case, but we all come with very different life experiences. And let me give you a little example. This may not be a particularly important one for relational mission, okay, because you guys are all coming very much from the same sort of church background. But I'm going to use as an illustration of something you can do. People who have problems with migraines sometimes have to keep a pain diary, and they have to keep a record of how much pain they're going through each day, and they give it on a scale of 1 to 10. And I came up with an exercise a few years ago to illustrate, because we work with ECM, as I've said. ECM is an interdenominational church planting agency. And so therefore people come in from different church backgrounds. So on this pain scale, what I asked people to do was, on the 3 issues of church leadership, of baptism, and of spiritual gifts, I asked people to write down what they believed in 3 lines, okay? And then on the pain scale, to mark off how much pain would it cause them to work with somebody who had a different opinion to them on that particular issue, okay? So let's say it's adult baptism. I'm a big believer in adult baptism. How much difficulty would it be for me to work on a team with somebody who believed it was legitimate to baptize children? Okay, So I'm giving you that as an example, but I want you now to translate it into your situation, because it may be that those three things, those are things that you don't disagree on, but you do disagree on other stuff. It is good to know that beforehand. So if you're building a team, to actually go through the exercise of finding out what your areas of difference are. What, when it comes to models of church, our ecclesiology, even though it's quite, in relational mission, you've got fairly clear values on those things. Often when it comes to practices, there is differences between the churches, right? And you would expect that there to be differences because of the cultures that are involved. So to recognize where those differences are and to work on that as a team is absolutely vital so that you don't have tensions. There are things also like Belbin, which is a team roles exercise, which is really useful to do as well, to understand and value the different gifts that people are bringing to the team. So Belbin, B-E-L-B-I-N, you can look that up on the internet. For me, that's one of the best tools to help to, as I say, value people's gifts. Not everybody is a creative thinker. Not everybody is a critical thinker. And as if in our case, in our team, we had four creative thinkers and one critical thinker. You can imagine what the team meetings were like. Everybody was coming up with new ideas every week, okay? And the critical thinker felt like they were the party pooper for everything, because they were always saying, you can't do that because of this, you can't do that. They felt they were being painted as the negative person. On the contrary, actually, that was the most vital person in the team, because we would have made so many mistakes if we'd not had that person. So Belbin helps to validate everybody within the team and recognize the different things that each people bring.
Great. I've got another one, Jim. This one is from Kevin Emmer. It says, can you please say something about the challenge of learning to accept local culture whilst at the same time drawing people into kingdom culture, and how you found that?
Yeah. That's actually a quite complicated question, because it depends what you mean by kingdom culture. I'm going to take it what you mean is the values of the kingdom as they are taught in Scripture, but those things are not without a cultural expression. The way that we express kingdom values is enculturated, and so, you know, for example, you know, if we want to love people, you can imagine what I was saying about social distance and communicating love. You would do that differently in different cultures. The value is the same, but it needs to be expressed in a culturally appropriate way. And so, yes, there are frequently clashes of kingdom culture with the culture of the where you are. But I think more to the point, what we need to get is to try and understand what lies behind the the culture. So, for example, one of the things that I think we're seeing in Europe today is a real resurgence in nationalism. It's manifested in different ways in different places. And the nation has its place in God's purposes, but unfortunately, nationalism is really driving a lot of very anti-kingdom things right now. We are a people from every tongue and tribe and nation. We are called to build a church that is where men and women, slave and free, find their unity in Christ. To put your national identity first is right against all kingdom values. And so if somebody is, I've got to put it, manifesting something of their culture that's just different, that's not a problem. But if they are, if what's coming out is a nationalistic spirit, I think that's very dangerous. And I think the church does need to be more bold in that area. Now, I would suggest that this is something that is quite specific in reality. Behind that question, I'm sure there's a specific example that you're thinking of. So I'm loath to give too much of a general answer, but I do think that's an important thing that is constantly in the background, the challenges that the gospel does need to make to all cultures, but at the same time that is expressed culturally as well. Okay, I hope you don't think that's a dodge on the question.
No, that's good, thanks, Jim. Okay, we've got another one from Nick and Corey. Can you say more about preparing practically around finances, pensions, tax, etc.? It sometimes seems a bit difficult subject to think about, as we also want to trust God for these things. How do we get the focus right?
That's a very good question, and I mean we've been supported through the last nearly 30 years by our church, and there's no question that this is we are totally dependent on God, and we very much sense that. But we do need to be responsible and recognize that we live in a world which is set up to help us to sustain life in a certain way. And I think we do need to look at, on the financial side, is, to be very careful with debt, and to make sure that that doesn't become biblically, the Deuteronomy case of, we're the head, not the tail, and don't let finances rule you. On the pension front, national insurance contributions, I would really encourage you to, if you're going to move overseas, to continue to pay your national insurance contributions in the UK. It may be different in different countries, but to pay your Class 2 voluntary contributions to keep your pension rights going. That's not a lot of money, but it means that you can do that. And generally speaking, I would really encourage you to be open and honest with your churches about your financial needs, with your supporters, to be not mentioning it every single time, but to where there is a specific need, and if you're raising support, then that is something you're going to have to invest a lot of time and effort in. Our experience has been, and this is probably my last word on this question. Our experience has been that if you communicate well with your supporters, if you make them a priority, if every couple of weeks they are getting some information from you, if you're telling them about what's just happened and what's just about to happen, encouraging them to pray, if they feel part of what God is doing in another part of Europe as a result of their support, then they are over the moon to be able to support you. For them, their job to be able to contribute to what God is doing in another place is one of the great privileges of being a Christian. And don't deprive them of that by hiding your financial need. Okay, Mark, are you curating these questions for me?
Yeah, I'm coming through. We've got a lot more now. I realise we've only got a couple of minutes, but I can keep going if everyone's happy to stay on the line a little bit longer.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
I just realised I missed one out. So going back to Lindsay Stevenson, she's written, how important is it to go to a new place as a new team together, or if it's your first time working outside of your own culture, would you recommend joining an established team who will help you learn the new culture before considering moving on to a totally new town or city?
I've never had the luxury of forming a team and that whole team going together. I know that some have been able to do that. I think it's good, but I think my short answer is probably the team that goes initially will not be the team that remains long term. There will be people that will go and then they will leave and move on. There will be others that will arrive. And when one person, what I do know from team working is when one person joins or leaves a team, it's a completely new team. And the dynamics change. So I think even if you go as a set team, you will have to relearn how to be effective. And I think that's something I really would encourage you to spend some time thinking about how you're going to build your team and how you're going to sustain it.
Okay, brilliant. That's good. Language learning, just the whole principle of people kind of ruling themselves out because they don't think they can learn the language, or that doing something is conditional upon language. Can you say how you have kind of overcome this, or sort of helped people with that kind of mindset?
I did say I think that pretty much everybody can learn another language. I think it really is a matter of recognizing your ability level and maximizing the strengths that you have, minimizing the weaknesses that you have, and finding the motivation and a way of learning that works for you. I was not good at languages at school. I failed my French O-level 3 times. When I started to learn Spanish, I could not say a single word. And that's the state that I came in when I came out to Spain. Okay. I was 28, which is very late to be learning your first second language, if you understand my meaning. Most people say I've got very good Spanish. Okay, so it is possible, even if you don't think of yourself as particularly capable and if you don't have advantages. Motivation is absolutely critical. And with me, I basically completely parked everything I'd ever learned about language learning previously. You remember when you're at school and you learned lists of vocabulary, all of that went. I said, no, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to try and learn by talking to people. And so I would just talk. And when I didn't have a word, I would say, I don't know what the word is. What's the word? And get people to help me. And so I maximize my own strengths in being an extrovert to get over the challenges that I had. But I think being committed to it, giving it the time is not enough just to do an hour every now and then, 2 or 3 times a week. That's not enough. You need to really commit every single day time to this, and as much as possible to surround yourself with the language that you're learning in. So, watch the news, listen to music, watch films. It's good to watch films that are, that the plot already, and then what's happening, and that helps you to understand from the context what the dialogue means. And get reading your Bible in your new language as early as you can.
Great, thanks, Jim. I think the only other one is just there's a question on the best model for supporting church planters. I know that's quite a big question. There's lots of different options there, but I was wondering whether or not you have some resources you could recommend on helping people set up support that we could maybe make use of in RM.
Okay. Yeah, I will make some inquiries about it. I'm sure we do, Mark. I mean, ECM as a mission agency, we are about supporting people into evangelism and church planting in Europe. And as I said, we're interdenominational, but we work with lots of different groups, and we've got resources and we've got experience, and absolutely would love to be of support to you guys. How can I put it? That it's very encouraging, actually, to me, what you're doing today, because all too often what's happening now is that churches are sending people. They're saying, well, we don't need mission agencies, we don't need support structures. We can prepare people and we can send them without any involvement of anybody else. And the reality is that there's so many things to think through. There's so many aspects of helping to adjust to another culture. And the sort of things that you're doing today, I think is just fabulous, to build that structure and that mutual support network that you've got going will really help you all to be successful. You need each other. It is not just a case of going alone here. And so I'm just delighted to be part of this. Fantastic.
Great, thanks, Jim. Brilliant. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for. Just to say thank you so much for giving us your morning, Jim, to just impart some of that really valuable information. I think you've had so much experience of doing this with so many people. It's just really helpful for us all to just download a little bit of that this morning, and we will no doubt have other opportunities to partner with you, but it's just been such a pleasure. So thanks again.
Thank you. I'll pass on the PowerPoint, and as I said, if anybody's interested in that course this summer, then just let me know.